Okay, let's settle once and for all a question that I get asked all the time. Do you really need a long arm to quilt well? I know why you're asking this question because quilting can feel like a giant fork in the road. You scroll past social media posts with gorgeous quilting and you think, yeah, but she's probably got a long arm. Or you think about the investment incurred in a long arm and you think, oh my word, that's a pipe dream. I will never get to that. So let's have an honest conversation about it. Because the truth of the matter is, you can create beautiful quilting at either one. I've quilted hundreds and hundreds of quilts, many at a domestic sewing machine and tons at my long arm, and I've had success on both. So it's not about the status of having one or the other or about having a fancy long arm. It's really about the fit for you personally. It might be the fit for your space or the fit for your posture. Certainly, it's about the fit for your projects and for your season of life. So if you've ever felt like you're not enough because you don't have a fancy machine, or you've ever thought, ooh, if I had a long arm, that would just unlock every quilting dream I've ever had. Let's have a conversation about it. Certainly, one of the first considerations as to what type of machine you quilt at is going to be space and perhaps your personal comfort. So, in terms of space, you likely already have a domestic sewing machine. If you're making quilts, certainly you do. Well, I guess you could be piecing them by hand, but probably you have a sewing machine already. You've got some level of space set up. And a long arm definitely takes more space, larger footprint. But another space requirement that you want to think about at your domestic machine would be space for the quilt to spread out. Have you got a table space or a working space to work at? However, if you do have that, great. A long arm does take that larger footprint. Even the smallest frames are usually about 5 feet long and require 3.5 to 4 feet of depth. A larger machine and frame like the one that I have, same 4 feet of depth, plus a little to walk around in, but I need 13 feet in length. And so you can see that does require a great deal more space, and not everyone has that. Although, spoiler alert, as I talk about more of the features of the long arm and why that's what I choose to quilt on, you might find yourself willing to find that space somewhere and give up some other things for it. But that's entirely up to you. Meantime, at a domestic sewing machine, one of the things you also need to consider is your physical comfort. A domestic sewing machine requires a lot of the wrangling of the quilt, if you will, is done with your hands and therefore your shoulders and your neck. And it is very, very physical. So there is a limit to how much of that you can do. So if you're a person that's quilting just for yourself, maybe yourself and a friend, but perhaps you do 4 or 6 or maybe a dozen quilts in a year, maybe that's the perfect fit for you because you're okay quilting in half-hour stints and then come back tomorrow and quilt a little more and next week and quilt a little more, and it doesn't matter to you if it takes a couple of weeks to complete that quilt. However, if you want to quilt more quilts, if you're choosing to quilt for hire as I do, or maybe you quilt for charitable reasons, but for one of those reasons, you're making several dozens or maybe 100 or more quilts that you're completing in a year, that speed is going to be very difficult to do at a sit-down machine simply because of the physical endurance it takes, the toll that it takes on your neck and shoulders particularly to be manipulating the quilt and the fabric under the needle. In my own case, quilting at my domestic machine is how I got started with machine quilting. I had come from a world of hand quilting. That was my experience until I was, I don't know, in my mid-40s probably. And so when I first started quilting at my domestic machine, that seemed like a giant step forward for quilters. I could get so many more quilts done, and it felt so fast, and I loved doing it. And I actually started quilting for hire for a number of my friends early on at my domestic sewing machine. And the turning point came for me when my friend Mary invited me to her home, and she had a very entry-level, quite simple and quite small long arm. And she invited me to bring a project or two and complete them on her little long arm. So I think that first afternoon I took a baby quilt and maybe a lap quilt to her house. Before the afternoon was over, I knew already this was where I wanted to go because I saw the speed at which I could accomplish an entire quilt on that machine, and I wanted that right away. So there is that very real difference. It is so much faster and so much more efficient to complete a quilt on the long arm. And this applies not only to the quilting, because you can see the working area and work much more quickly as opposed to having to work in a small area and move it around under the needle, but it also applies to the prep. So for example, at a sit-down machine, whether it's a domestic sewing machine or even a sit-down long arm, still those layers have to be affixed together in such a way that they cannot move. And that usually involves some type of basting. I think probably the most common is with safety pins. And it can take several hours to put all those safety pins through the layers of your quilt. And then of course, as you're quilting, you've got to be removing those safety pins too. So all of that takes quite a bit of time. And all of that is removed at the long arm. It's minutes compared to hours in terms of the prep and the readiness of the quilt to get started on the quilting. So for me, that was the turning point, and that was worth any kind of shifting I needed to do in my life to make that happen. I knew I wanted to make quilts, and this was the way I wanted to do it. A little part of the difference in speed as well comes from the actual quilting itself. The motions at a long arm machine are simply larger and faster, but typically the type of quilting that you're doing also is a little looser, a little bigger at the long arm. That's not always true. You can do finely detailed quilting, but working at a domestic sewing machine, you cannot do the big sweeping motions. And so generally you are limited to a smaller scale. And that too is a factor in the amount of time that it takes to complete a quilt. Nevertheless, by and large, the same things can be quilted on both machines. In fact, I have an online course that I call Free Motion Quilting Masterclass, in which I teach over 25 different free motion designs. And I show each of them at both a domestic machine and a long arm machine because I want to prove to my students that you can do the same quilting at both. And I hope I'm making that point clear to you here today too. It's not that you have to choose one or the other, but there are some things that apply. So for example, here is one of the quilting designs I teach in my masterclass. Here you see it quilted at my domestic machine, and here it is quilted at the long arm. Same design, however, I did quilt it in that slightly smaller, more manageable scale at the domestic sewing machine. And I quilted it a little bit looser, a little bit freer, certainly a lot faster at the long arm. But again, it is possible to quilt those same designs on both machines. In my story about when I turned a corner and decided to go all in on a long arm, I kind of made it sound like that was a quick step and a quick changeover. And in fact, it wasn't, because there is a learning curve for sure involved, and there is definitely a price point difference involved. So let's talk first about the learning curve. The difference between the motion at a sit-down machine in which you're moving the fabric under the needle, or the motion of a long arm in which you're grasping the handlebars and moving the machine, is like chalk and cheese. So you may know how to quilt the most beautiful feathers at a sit-down machine. When you come to a long arm and start quilting the same feathers, it's going to feel like you're quilting in a mirror. It's going to feel backwards, left-handed, all the awkward things that you can think of. However, that is absolutely doable. It takes some getting used to, but I don't want to steer you wrong. It's not that you can just go from one to the other in the same afternoon and you'll have the same quality of quilting. There will be some practice and some learning and some development of your skill involved in that. When we talk about the price points, there is a significant difference. Of course there is. And I want to be clear and open about this and not to misguide you in any way. Because most of us already have a domestic sewing machine, because I'm talking to quilt makers, right? There's probably no price difference in that. Like maybe you just have to go buy a hopper foot so that you can do free motion quilting, and that might cost you $50, and away you go. You're ready to start quilting. Perhaps some basting pins, right? No terribly specialized equipment required for that. So that's great. At the other end of the scale, a new digitally driven long arm machine like the one that I've got here can run $45,000 and $50,000. They're enormous expenditures. However, Don't be scared off by that, because there's a whole range all the way in between there. And I'm going to talk about just a few of those in case you are on the fence making this decision right now and want to know the truth of it. My story was, let me say it a little differently. I think of long arms a little bit like I think of car buying. Most of us have already done that at some point in our lives, right? And when we go into a dealership, there's kind of two companies you can land in. You can be the company that wants the brand new car with that new car smell, and the price point is what matters there. But the same price point could also buy you a Cadillac, a Lexus that's used, has perhaps more bells and whistles, has a smooth ride and leather seats and quiet sound on the road. All those features that you think of in an expensive vehicle, same price point. Do you see what I'm saying here? I'm drawing this parallel because long arms work the same way. You can buy an entry-level machine, brand new over here, and of course I've already told you the price tag on fancy Cadillacs of machines, but you can buy used ones of these machines as well for a similar price point to the lower end models. And this is how I approached acquiring my first long arm. I went for a used one, and I went for that higher end machine with durability, with high precision machining or manufacturing or engineering in that machine, because I felt like that would give me a better quilting result, less troubles, and also be lower maintenance and even easier for me to maintain myself, because it was so well made and so well engineered. That certainly proved true in my first long arm. I purchased it in 2015, and I ran it for about 6 years. About 750 quilts ran through that machine. And when I sold it, it held its value because I had purchased it used. When I sold it, I got the same amount for it that I had paid for it. So if you're weighing price points and investment and is it worth it, seriously consider looking at a used machine in the high quality range, because they hold their value so well and they serve you well. Let me give you another example. That same early machine, I bought a batch of bobbins. Now, M-class bobbins is what we frequently use on long arms. They're a larger bobbin, and M-class is just a style of bobbin. And most machine brands like Bernina or like Gamble or like Handy Quilter or Anova will manufacture their own bobbins and sell them. And they're usually pricey, as brand name things tend to be. So I got this bright idea. I found some M-class bobbins online in some, I don't know, Etsy shop. This was before Amazon was big, and purchased a packet of 50 for a fraction, a tiny fraction of the cost of the brand name bobbins that matched my machine. That was a very questionable decision, because I quickly found that those bobbins were of quite inferior quality. I found some that literally had a burr on them. If I ran my finger around them, I could feel sharp bits of metal. I found some that were absolutely loose and floppy on my bobbin winder, and therefore the bobbins wouldn't even wind because they wouldn't grip properly. I found others that were so tight, the channel to fit them on the bobbin winder, they were so tight and they also wouldn't wind properly. And so then I had stitching errors and tension troubles and all kinds of errors. Long story short, as I recall, I literally threw away 17 of that bundle of 50 bobbins that were visibly or measurably to the naked eye off the mark, and just got rid of them. I have to wonder now, looking back, how many of the remaining 33 bobbins were a tiny bit off the mark and I didn't even realize it. My point in all this being, don't sacrifice high quality to get inexpensive. Often that will cost you in the long run. So thinking about long arm machines, if you were asking my advice, I would say go for the better machine used, then go for the cheaper machine brand spanking new. This one is likely to serve you better, and there is a very real repercussions to picking the better quality machine with the highly engineered parts that work, that run smoothly. I drive a Bernina, and I'm not sorry, because it is Swiss engineering. Swiss engineering is a phrase we all know because it's known for its precision, the fact that it works and it lasts and it serves its owner well. That's the beauty of a high quality machine. I've compared the domestic and long arm types of machines for you, but there is another huge factor in your quilting journey, in your learning curve, that does not really have anything to do with either of those tools. And it's you. It's the amount of practice and effort that you're willing to put in to learning this new skill. I probably sound like a broken record because I say this so often, but I truly believe it to be true. All of us start feeling like a kindergartner. When we start free motion quilting, that is a different thing than probably anything else you do in your life, whether you're working at a domestic sewing machine or whether you're holding the handlebars of a long arm. And so if you can accept that you're going to start and you're going to feel awkward and feel like a beginner and just move on from that and commit to pressing and practicing through that, you'll come out the other side as a great quilter, no matter which tool you choose to use. And I truly, truly believe that if quilting, in whatever way you're doing it now, brings you joy, brings you fulfillment, brings you finished projects, then that's the right setup for you. I am definitely not here to press you into, you need bigger, you need better. You don't. You need what fits you and what helps you get your quilts finished and love the process and saves your back too. So whatever that looks like for you, that's the equipment setup that is exactly right. If you're ready to grow your quilting skill, no matter which machine you use, do consider my free motion quilting masterclass because it does teach step by step at both styles of machines a wide variety of quilting designs. So if free motion quilting is your jam or it's your dream, check out that masterclass and see what it offers for you. Next episode, we'll talk about whether quilting ought to remain a fulfilling hobby or whether you might want to turn it into a business and how you tell which one is right for you. Stay tuned.